So first I will have a short introduction. Later you will go to another room, divide into groups, and work. The topic of this work will be related with learning outcomes. Just to show you, I was dealing with learning outcomes in different conditions. You see here in Jordan, here in Vietnam with Ho Chi Minh, here in Kyrgyzstan. It was one of the important learning outcomes we were able to develop. But anyway, what is important that everybody shall know, what does it mean, this learning outcome, rezultata uczenia? It is a statement of what a learner is expected to know, understand, and be able to demonstrate after completion of the process of learning. It seems to be obvious. However, when we have campus or Erasmus Plus projects, if we work on, for example, new courses or training materials, especially with former USSR states, so very often people prepare documents based only on contents. That means give only content and do not determine exactly what are learning outcomes, what are effects of learning. Also, as for assessment methods, for example, I remember that there was one course on something like related with agroeconomics and so on, and there were for employers, and there were questions like this, that temperature, appropriate temperature for something is A, 25 degrees, B, 26 degrees, C, 27 degrees, D, 28 degrees. I explain, it is not important. If you have such course for somebody who is, for example, employer, so you shall ask given person how to organize something, yeah? What are important factors, and not ask some numerical values and force people to learn some things by heart. Therefore, it's very important if we have any course, any training materials, any subject area, to determine very precisely what do we want that people will be able to do after finishing of our course. And also what is important, they shall focus not what we want them to do, but what they really are able to do, and how it can be used for them for the future. Here I have a special slide for you, where you have examples of nice formulations of learning outcomes from top universities in the world. You see MIT, Heidelberg, Cambridge, Oxford, Vienna, Tokyo, and so on, just to have a look. How do they formulate learning outcomes? How do they formulate their policy for curriculum development and so on? Another information I just want to signal to you is that in USA, they have a special institute, National Institute for Learning Outcomes Assessment. And you can find online, free of charge, many booklets concerning various aspects of learning outcomes. So there is a lot of, there are plenty of materials we can just take and use as a kind of reference materials. What is also important, if we formulate learning outcomes, it is good to use so-called action words, that it's something which can be evaluated. For example, if I teach, let us say, thermodynamics, and so I cannot put learning outcomes that student knows thermodynamics. What does it mean to know thermodynamics? Up to now, there are many problems not solved up to now. Problem of irreversibility, nobody knows how one shall explain this. So to know thermodynamics is too general. But if we say that student can interpret first and second law of thermodynamics, and concrete, I say, please state what is second law of thermodynamics, what is the meaning of this law, give example of this law, yeah? So therefore it is very important, if we formulate learning outcomes, to use action words. And we see that if we think, for example, using categorization of Bloom, let us say this, knowledge, comprehension, application, evaluation, and so on, that similar action words can appear at different levels. So that means using given action word, we cannot say that, for example, if we have beginner, we use this simple word like define, describe, and then for more advanced level, we use assess and so on. Because, for example, the word explain can be used at different levels. I can ask kindergarten children, please explain me something. And I can ask a doctoral student, please explain me something. But then I read them up more from doctoral student than from kindergarten. I tell it because in Poland I remarked that there are some people who like just to give some prescriptions. If you have bachelor studies, please use these words. If you have master studies, please use these words. If you have doctoral students, please use these words. But it all depends on the context. Then, another thing, here it is from a book by Declan Kennedy, How to Write Learning Outcomes. So, examples, you see. For example, we have course of physical chemistry. So one of learning outcomes, classify reactions as exothermic and endothermic. Very clear. Classify, please tell me, if you have reaction, please tell me. Yeah? Or, for example, if you have course of science education, discuss the role of internet in physics teaching. Yeah? So, very concrete learning outcome. Somebody is able to explain what can be the role of internet in physics teaching, for example, to show some simulations, to show real-time experiments, and so on. If you have training for, let us say, administrative officers, use MS Office effectively and skillfully. Also, you have, for example, this, computer driving license, something like this, and also you can assess if given person can use MS Office, knows these tricks or not. Or, for example, for health science, display a willingness to communicate well with patients. It is also important. One can observe a person, for example, who is on the internship in hospital, how this person behaves. So therefore, you see, each learning outcome is very precisely determined. If we now work on a module, like for example in our project we have to work on a module. So we see, first we have program aims and objectives. So we discuss, for example, that we started in for work package 1, we'll continue for work package 2, and so on, that we shall have module, for example, on ethics in science society. Yeah? Then we shall have so-called intended learning outcomes. We have all these regulations, what our colleague showed us today, and so on. So we would say, it would be very nice if our doctoral students or our staff had such and such and such competence. That means such and such learning outcomes. Then we prepare curriculum, we evaluate, and finally we see if really our students, our learners achieve it or not. So first, if we only plan design learning outcomes, we have always to check if really learners have these learning outcomes or not. If not, that means we have to change teaching and learning methods, or we have to change our learning outcomes. So, as for methods of assessment, some of you are from pedagogical universities and most of you are also academic teachers, so you know that there are plenty of methods of assessment. And what is important, we have to choose appropriate method of assessment. If our learning outcome is, for example, that somebody shall be entrepreneurial, we cannot check it using some test. Because if we organize tests, we check only knowledge, but not if person is entrepreneurial. We have to give some task, for example, to solve. And we can observe how person solves this task. And then we can check if given person is entrepreneurial or not. And then there is another important thing. Like in physics, you have so-called Heisenberg uncertainty principle that we cannot measure momentum and position with the same precision. If we measure momentum with precision, so then position is not determined well, and so on. So one can say that also there is a kind of uncertainty principle for assessment and learning process. The more precise assessment, the more we perturb learning process. If we determine very strict assessment rules, so learners will try to fit this purpose, and we learn in such a way that they will just adapt to these rules. What does it mean? They will just fulfill our wishes, but we do not have guarantee that they will be independent, that they will be creative, and so on. Yeah? So, if we determine our assessment rules very precisely, we can be almost sure that all students will learn in such a way just to fit, not to get knowledge, but to pass examination, to pass some tests. Yeah, adopt to this. So therefore, if we speak about learning outcomes and assessment, we have to be reasonable. To have rules, but these rules cannot be too strict. For example, like it is for very good, no, there should be at least 90% points, yeah? Because also there is a question mark. What is the score for, let us say, jumbo jet pilot? 100%, yeah? If somebody knows how to fly jumbo jet for 99%, would you just use such jumbo jet? Never know, because always something may happen, yeah? So therefore, if you think about these rules that you give some percentage as criteria, we approve or not given learning outcome, so also you have to check if you can use this or not. If you use it for knowledge, so it's okay. You can assume that if somebody knows, if we have very good, well-formulated tests, and if somebody passes, let us say, 70, 80%, so we can say, okay, given person has such structure of knowledge that it is sufficient. Later, we can catch it. However, for some problems, for example, in health sciences, so you have something like yes, no. Patient will be alive or will be dead. Yeah? So then you cannot assume that if somebody knows 80% how to treat given disease, so he will be good. He will have very good knowledge. Yeah? So therefore, we have to be very careful with this assessment. So finally, some hints. First hint, ask yourself, what do you want learners to be able to do? Not something, he shall know my subject, he shall know this book. Concretely, what given person shall be able to do? To present something, to interpret something, to evaluate something, to defend something, and so on. Second, what do you want learners to know in general? All facts, or some basic facts, and so on. And what do you want learners to appreciate, value? It is very tricky, this problem of attitude, of social competences, and so on. But also, it is important that if we formulate learning outcomes, we take into account also these problems related, for example, with ethics. And also, what is very important for international context. Learners shall know how to investigate the world. That means not limit themselves only to what they have as narrow subjects, but to see it in wider context. Sky is the limit. Recognize perspectives. To know if I have an opinion, other people can have different opinions, different perspectives, different approaches, depend on culture, depend on historical background, and so on. Communicate ideas. It is not very important what I want to say, but what I want that other hear from me. Yeah? I want to say something, it's nothing. I want that people take what I sent to them. Yeah? Adopt this message I pass. So it is not very important what I want to say, but what I want them to understand, to get from what I am saying. And finally, take actions. If we have knowledge, if we have skills and so on, we also shall be able to act, to take actions. So therefore, if we will teach anything, say, okay, you acquire some new competences, you have some learning outcomes, but we expect you not only have this learning outcome, but use these learning outcomes. Because let us say knowledge society is just first step, knowledge, I know something. But next step will be society which is creative, like people say conceptual age. That means I do not only have knowledge, but I can use this knowledge and I know how to use this knowledge and how to do it in an appropriate, for example, ethical way. So it was a kind of general introduction. And now we will pass to another room and we will have a kind of group work. We have, yesterday we discussed it also with Tatiana and with Irina, so we took results of questionnaire we used already in Riga concerning these different topics which are important for different target groups. And we took these topics which were pointed out by the most people. So for example, respondents, but also you, stated that what is important inter alia, commercialization of research, research methodology, project writing. So we have such exercise. We'll be divided into groups, and each group, let us say about 3, 4 to 5 people, shall propose up to 7 learning outcomes. Yeah. And propose adequate, just shortly, teaching learning methods, and propose assessment methods. And also, what if we come back? So then, you see that we have the same topic for 2 different target groups. For example, for administration and for supervisors, or funding for administration for PhD students. So please think about learning outcomes for different target groups. If somebody works in administration, so already has some experience in project writing. So we can propose course which is more advanced. But if we have PhD students, so we have to introduce the student. So it would be later interesting to compare results of your work. And it also will serve us as a feedback for further work on our work packages. So therefore, now I stop my presentation, and please follow me.